Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I drew this eye using graphite pencils. So today's video is actually being sponsored by Clear Art and I'm going to be reviewing and giving my feedback on their drawing set. But first let's get on with the tutorial and I'll talk to you a bit more about that in a minute. So the first thing that I like to do is create the initial sketch of the eye. So I like to block out all of the general shapes of the eye and the structures. And to do this, I use a really light pencil. So for this, I am using the 2H graphite pencil from the drawing set, and I'm just blocking out the general shapes. So firstly, I created a small circle for the pupil, and then a larger circle around that for the iris. A lot of the iris might be covered by something like the upper eyelid and the waterline. I also drawn out the basic shape of the eye, the tear duct, the upper eyelids and the waterline. Anyway, let's get into what this drawing set contains. So firstly, it comes in this really nice case which helps to keep your pencils and all of your supplies really safe so they don't get damaged. You get 2 sharpeners, you get a large range of graphite pencils from 5H up until 8B. You also get another graphite pencil, 3 charcoal pencils, a cutting knife which is really good for cutting things like your eraser. You get a pencil extender so you can make the most out of your pencils, 3 blending stumps, an eraser, a kneaded eraser, some graphite and charcoal blocks, and a sanding block, which I like to use for things like sanding down charcoal to make charcoal powder. You also get a few extra slots so you can keep some of your pencils in there as well. So if you want to check out this drawing set, then head over to clearartproducts.com, or I have left a link in the top of the description so that you can check that out as well. But let's get on to using these supplies. So the first thing that I did was I blocked in the pupil using the soft charcoal pencil so that we can get it really dark. The pupil tends to be the darkest part of the eye, so I wanted to block that in first. So what I loved about these charcoal pencils were that they sharpen really well and they don't break at all, and also there is a clear difference between the hard, medium and soft charcoal pencil, whereas I found with other brands of charcoal there isn't much difference between them, but for these the soft was a lot darker and also softer than for example the hard was. The hard one was a lot lighter, so you can get a lot of different values within these charcoal pencils even though there's just 3 of them. So now what I'm doing is I'm using the 2H graphite pencil and I'm using this on the iris. So the first thing that I'm doing is adding a really light layer of the 2H to indicate where the highlights are within the iris and also where the shadowed areas are. So when I did my initial sketch, I blocked out things like general highlights in the iris and the unique flecks in the iris. So I did use a reference photo, which is really important to use if you want to get a really realistic look so that you have something to follow to act as a guideline. So what I'm doing is I'm using that 2H and I'm applying a bit more pressure and building up more coverage on the shadowed areas, and I'm leaving the highlighted areas completely blank of any graphite so that we can clearly see where those highlighted areas are. I'm also going in little pencil strokes and lines rather than lots of circular motions because there is kind of like this spoke pattern in the iris of the lines going from the outer edge of the iris into the middle. And the outer edge of the iris tends to be the darkest part, as well as the little portion surrounding the pupil. So it's really important that you look at your reference photo and kind of establish and get in your mind where the shadows are and where the highlights are. So now once I've added that general layer of the 2H pencil, I'm now going to a darker pencil, which is the HB. And I like to build up to the shadows and slowly darken as I add more and more layers rather than go in with the really dark pencil straight away. So I'm layering this HB pencil mostly on the shadowed areas so that we can build up the contrast, we can have those darker shadows and there'll be more of a contrast between those shadows and those highlights. So I'm just going over with this pencil over those 2H areas where the darker flecks in the iris are, and also on the outer edge of the iris, which is the darkest part, especially on the top part of the iris because you have the eyelid which is covering it, so this is going to be in more of a shadow. So it's important that you look at the direction that the flecks in the iris are going in so that you get this 3-dimensional kind of look. And it is important that you block off the highlights because this is what is going to add shine to your iris. So now that I've got this layer down, what I want to do is soften it out a bit so it's not so gritty and so all of the pencil strokes aren't so defined. So I used the blending stump from the set and I thought this was really, really good. It created a really smooth look and I really liked this blending stump. I like that you get a few different sizes so that you can use it for detailed areas as well, rather than just having one large blending stump for all of the areas. So I really liked that you had a few of them in the set. So I just lightly went over the whole area with that blending stump just to lightly soften everything out a bit and give it more of a softer look. So once I did that, I'm building up even more shadows using the 4B pencil. It's really important that you use sharp pencils as well, and what I liked about these graphite pencils was that you could get them really sharp. Another thing that I loved about these graphite pencils was the smoothness of them. They weren't gritty at all, which a lot of my other graphite pencils are, but I noticed straight away how smooth you can get a coverage with these graphite pencils. They are really nice and I'm going to be using them in a lot more of my graphite drawings because of how smooth they are, and they were really, really nice to work with. They are probably my favourite graphite pencils that I've ever tried. They're better than the Derwent pencils, I would say, and the Kimberly graphite pencils because they are a bit more gritty, whereas these are just really smooth. I never had any kind of grit with these pencils. So again, I'm building up the coverage with the 4B pencil, especially on the outer edge of that iris, as that is the darkest part. And I'm still going with the direction that these kind of flecks in the iris are going in, which is really important. As you can see, I'm still leaving areas kind of clear of any sort of graphite towards the middle of the iris so that you can get those highlighted areas to make it more contrasty. So now I want to build up the depth even more by using the 8B pencil. And this was really nice, but I then went and switched to the 6B pencil just because I didn't need it so dark. And it got it dark enough with the 6B pencil. Because I find as you go to softer pencils, you lose that definition because they are a lot softer and they don't stay as sharp for as long. So I'm just building up these pencils, I'm just building up the layers, and again I'm blending it out for the second time just to kind of soften out that layer again. I actually changed the pupil to graphite instead of charcoal just so that it looks a bit more cohesive with the rest of the iris. So now I'm going to use the kneaded eraser, and it's actually one of my favourite kneaded erasers that I've ever used because it isn't sticky like other ones that I've had, and it really lifted the graphite really nicely. Anyway, so I've just done a swatch of these graphite blocks, and as you can see, these are really, really great. There's a difference between the hard, medium and soft, and it allows you to cover a large portion of a drawing really, really quickly. So these are really useful as well if you want to cover, say, a large background. So now I want to go in with the 2H again, and I'm going to use this on the white of the eye. So a common misconception is that the white of the eye is just white, whereas in reality there's quite a bit of shading throughout the white of the eye to give it that spherical 3D look. So I'm first using that 2H pencil to add a base layer, and again it's generally at the top and the bottom of the white of the eye, and towards the middle it's quite clear and bright. I'm also now going in with the HB pencil to darken up the shading, especially under the eyelid and above the waterline and in the corners as well. So this is going to give you a really three-dimensional and realistic look. So I'm just building up those layers. You can use circular motions to make sure you got soft shading, and then I'm going to go in with that stump, and I'm just using that to blend everything out and to give a really smooth kind of soft finish. So I'm just doing this everywhere. I really did like everything in this drawing set. So the only thing that I didn't really use in this set was the sharpeners, and that's just because I don't really like handheld sharpeners. I'd much prefer to use a crank handle or electric sharpener, but that's just really my preference. That's nothing against the sharpeners in the set. So now what I'm doing is I'm working on the tear duct, and I'm using that darker 4B graphite pencil just to fill in the darkest areas of the tear duct because it was quite dark, but I've left a few areas clear where the highlights are. I then blend this out with the blending stump, add another layer of the 4B just to add a bit more depth, and then I'm going to use that kneaded eraser, which I love, just to add in those highlights. And as you can see, it really nicely lifts up that graphite pencil. So now what I'm doing is I'm working on the waterline and the skin around the eye. And again, I use the same technique. I used that 2H pencil for the first layer of shading, and then I added the HB. But the difference is now that when I like to blend out skin, I like to use a tissue because you get really soft, smooth shading. So I like to just wrap it around my finger and use circular motions to really soften everything out. And you can keep building up the layers with the pencils and then blend it out with the tissue once more. You can also use a stump for some of the darker areas because the tissue does lighten the area a bit and lift some of the graphite off. But it's up to you which sort of blending method you choose to use. I'm also working on the upper eyelid, and even though this upper eyelid is quite dark, again, I'm going to start really lightly. I don't want to kind of rush and make it too dark straight away. I like to build up to those darker values slowly over time. Otherwise, you can risk it becoming too muddy and too dark. So if you want to get really smooth shading, I recommend just adding a really light layer of the graphite down. Try not to press too hard, otherwise when you try and blend it out, you'll have stubborn pencil lines showing through. So just add a really light layer of graphite pencil and then blend it out with something like a blending stump, cotton bud, or tissue, and this will give you a really smooth finish, and then you can just keep layering to build up to darker shadows if you need to. So when I was trying to darken up the upper eyelid, I went to use the 4B and the 6B to get that really dark shading that we needed. And this creates more depth and gives a better contrast. So if you have a really small pencil when you're using the set and you've used the pencil a lot, it comes with this extender, this pencil extender, which means that you can put your small pencil in and therefore you can use it even when it's really small and hard to hold. So this is another great feature of this drawing set, which is just something that other drawing sets wouldn't normally include. So it's a great extra feature like the cutting knife. Other drawing sets wouldn't really include things like this. So it's really great that this drawing set kind of has everything you're going to need rather than you having to go and buy other things, other bits and pieces like pencil extenders individually. So now I'm adding the eyelashes, and there's a few things that you need to bear in mind when you're drawing eyelashes. Firstly, the upper eyelashes tend to be a lot thicker than the bottom eyelashes. You need to look at the direction that they're going in and the way they curve. So depending on where the eyelash is, it's going to curve in different directions. And you also need to look at the length of them and how many there is. So the bottom eyelashes are a lot sparser. So I recommend using one of the 4B pencils or even darker to first do a light kind of sketch of where they're going to be, and then once you're happy with the placement of your eyelashes, you can go in and darken them up slowly with some darker graphite pencils, so even up to the 8B because you really want to make them stand out. So I just marked them in quite lightly, and then I went over and thickened them up so they are a bit thicker at the roots, and then they taper to be a bit thinner at the ends. So this helps them to look more realistic. It's also important that you overlap your eyelashes so that they don't look too uniform. They can be quite random just to make them look a bit more natural. So now I'm just going and tweaking a few little things, kind of adjusting my contrast, darkening up certain areas and using the kneaded eraser to lighten up certain areas if I need to. So what's great about this kneaded eraser is that you can slowly lighten up areas without taking all of the graphite off, rather than just using a normal eraser which will just lift off the whole of the graphite. So you can get more subtle sort of highlights. So here I am using the cutting knife to show you how I create a little bit of eraser which I can use to create really detailed kind of highlights. So I just used that knife, which was really nice, just to create this kind of small part of the eraser which has a defined edge, and then I can use this to create those little highlighted eyelashes, which just makes the drawing look even more realistic and just makes it pop a bit more by adding these little contrasty eyelashes around the dark eyelashes. Anyway, I really did love using this drawing set. There's nothing I can say bad about it. I love the pencils and all of the supplies and the fact that it comes in a nice case. The price is really, really great, and I'm definitely going to be using it more in my future videos. So you'll be seeing me use this more because I love the graphite pencils in particular, and they are much better than my other ones. So I'm going to be using it lots more. Anyway guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you're new to my channel and you want to see more tutorials, make sure you subscribe and tick that that bell icon to get notified on my future videos. Also, if you want to see real-time tutorials, then head over to my Patreon. I have up to 15 real-time tutorials a month for just $5, so I'll leave a link to that in the description below as well. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!